Hey folks, so I just want to do a quick video here because obviously some big news broke that Semphis has joined Nilem in place of Flowsick, and after reaching out to Nilem and speaking with Valens, their in-game leader, it is confirmed that this is a permanent move, not just a stand-in situation. So it's definitely worth talking about, and I wanted to jump on top of it as soon as the news broke, basically, because it just kind of released out on Twitter via a tweet that Flowstick released saying he got replaced by Semphis to Lurk or whatever, and he was upset about it, which is understandable, of course. And that just got released, maybe 30 minutes or an hour before I started recording this video. So what I want to do in this video is just really quick, just kind of briefly talk about Nilem as a team and where they've come from and how they got where they are right now. And then I'm going to talk about Semphis joining a team, what it may mean to the team structure and what he can bring to the table, the kind of the pros and cons basically, and then what this might mean for the rest of the NA shuffle as well. So just to really briefly talk to you about Nilem is prior to the CEVO and MLG Season 6 Pro League LAN that we had earlier in April, April 13th through 16th I think it was, just a couple of weeks ago basically. Prior to that event, Nilem had no real LAN standing. I mean, a couple of their players like Flowsick and even Automatic had played on some teams in the past that had played in some, smaller NA LANs, but we had never seen Sangleton or Professor Chaos play a LAN, period, and as of 5, they hadn't played a LAN together at all. So all we could go off of was online results, and their online results were pretty promising leading up to the Season 6 LAN. I mean, they were able to get some big wins in ESCA in Season 18 to qualify for that LAN, including beating C9 twice during the regular season. They beat Liquid at the end of the regular season to qualify as well, and they had like a crazy kind of tiebreaker thing kind of going on for a while. And they also had a couple of wins against CLG and ESCA as well. So some promising online results, and they had some good online results as well in the online portion of the CEVO playoffs before attending the LAN. I think they had beat Luminosity in the upper bracket to kind of upset at the time because people at that point in time thought Luminosity was a bit better. Obviously, we kind of learned differently later on. And so, yeah, I mean, they just had some promising online results, but you never know how that's going to transition to LAN, right? You never know if players are going to be able to bring it to LAN. But when they got to the CEVO Season 6 LAN, they did bring it to LAN. I mean, they 2-0'd Luminosity right off the bat in the upper bracket on Cash and D2. Pretty one-sided scores, including some big T-sides. They had 9 rounds on T-side on both maps, so being able to play, both sides of the map quite well. Against CLG, they did get 0-2, but they challenged them. I mean, they lost 16-13 on Cash, and they took CLG to overtime on Inferno, losing 16-19. So they challenged, CLG, the favorite of the tournament, quite well. Then they did get kind of skunked by Elevate, though, in the lower bracket when they got eliminated. They got 0-2 by Elevate, including a 0-16 game on Mirage, and then 4-16 game on Dust 2. So pretty one-sided losses there to Elevate, but looking at the rest of the tournament and then, looking at ESCA afterwards, this kind of seems like an outlier. They seem to, challenge generally pretty well, even when they're losing. Basically, takeaways from this LAN is that these guys could perform on LAN. I mean, Automatic was huge in this event. He'll be huge in ESCA, we'll talk about in a second. Sangleton was also pretty damn good in this LAN, as well as at the Season 18 ESCA LAN, which we'll talk about in a second. So both those players look good. And Professor Chaos, while he didn't shine as much as those two players did, he still played pretty well, especially for, once again, a guy like Sangleton, who we had never really seen in the LAN before in NA. And even with Automatic, we really hadn't seen him in that much LAN action, to be honest. Same with, even Valens didn't really have that much LAN action either under his belt. Besides maybe like ClutchCon with Automatic with the Nile prior to the Nilem sponsorship, and maybe like way in the past, I think Automatic played for another Denial lineup like way back, long time ago. So yeah, it's just one of those things where it's not a lot of LAN experience, so they perform quite well for such a young team, basically. When they get to the Season 18 LAN as a team, they get 0-2'd by Virtus Pro in the upper bracket. Kind of expected this, but they didn't get embarrassed. I mean, they put up 7 rounds against VP on Cash, which is like one of VP's best maps, if not their best map. And then they were able to get 13 rounds on Virtus Pro on Inferno. And, VP is a pretty solid Inferno team, and, one of the best teams in the world, playing against like what some people thought at the time was like a Tier 2 NA team. So, challenging an elite level team, not bad for such a young team at their second LAN event as a team, and their second LAN period for some of their players, or at least a big LAN. And then from there, they actually 2-0'd Cloud9 in the lower bracket to, deal one of the most, you know, crazy upsets we've probably seen in North American play in a long time. Just absolutely decimating C9 on Inferno and then having a close win on Cash. And then when they went on to play Fnatic in the lower bracket later, they got kind of crushed on Cash, to be honest, but they actually challenged a little bit on Inferno. At least keeping it a respectable score line. They lost 16-10. So that's kind of your brief cap of Nilem, is a young team that doesn't have a whole lot of LAN experience. As a team, for sure, only 2 LAN events under their belt, and that's only just within the past 2 or 3 weeks of me posting this video, so not a whole lot of history there. For most of their players, like Sanctiton, like Professor Chaos, and even Automatic to a degree, just in Valens, just not much LAN experience, period, especially against top-level teams. Maybe some local stuff with friends, but not against any real credible teams. So, that's, to me, a good sign. And, Flowstick obviously had some experience in 1.6, and he's probably the most experienced player on the team, but now he's the one that's gone. So I guess there's no real need to kind of divulge into that. So that's kind of just a brief cap of Nilem, basically just a team without a lot of experience that is young and upcoming, I guess you could say. Now, because of this situation, I kind of felt like the team was in danger of being poached, like players like Sanctiton and Automatic, and maybe even Professor Chaos, maybe even Flowsick, depending on what role a team was looking for. These players were going to look pretty attractive to some of these teams like Cloud9 that were looking to make roster changes. Maybe even to Hiko, who's trying to build a team in NA. Maybe even to a team like CLG, who was rumored to possibly going through some roster changes. So these players were poachable, is my point. They were probably some valued targets, so to speak. And from what I understand from talking to Valens, their in-game leaders, some of their players were approached at different points in time after the SIVA LAN and ESEA LAN, whenever teams were first beginning their talks of looking at potential options for players. So I was right. I mean, that there was this risk that they were going to be poached. But with this pickup of Semphis, it appears like they have actually solidified themselves. Now, with that being said, we'll talk about the pros and cons that Semphis brings to the table, and then we'll talk about how this might affect other NA shuffle moves. So, obviously, what Semphis brings to the table is a lot of experience. I mean, he's going to be the most experienced player on this team now that he's joined it when it comes to playing against elite-level teams, when it comes to just playing LANs in general. He's going to bring a lot of experience to the table, which means he has a lot that he can teach some of these younger players like Sanctiton, like Automatic, like Professor Chaos. He can teach them a lot. He can teach, really the whole team a lot. I mean, Valens is not excluded from this. I mean, he can teach this young team quite a lot, I think. He brings a lot of experience to the table. There's no doubt there on that part. Also, I was kind of curious about what role he would play on the team because, obviously Flowsick was their lurker, and so Semphis coming onto the team, he's not meant to be a lurker, I don't think. I mean, he even expressed how his, kind of most recent play with Cloud9, he kind of got shifted to a lurker role, which he wasn't very comfortable with. Even though he prides himself on being pretty versatile and being able to play lots of roles, he didn't really feel comfortable in that role. So I was a little bit concerned that him coming into this team, he just kind of plugs into Flowsick's role, and that could cause some issues with other players' roles. Or if they want to move him to a different role, like an entry fragger or something like that, then maybe that moves like Sanctiton or Automatic out of a position they're comfortable in, and that could cause a problem. So I was a little bit concerned about that, as far as that maybe being a potential con that he could bring to the team, basically. But from what I understand, he will come to the team as more of a support player / entry fragger. So apparently, when they do have a lurker, even though a lot of Nilem setups will not feature one from what I understand, but when they do have a lurker on T-side, it will in fact be Valens, their in-game leader. Also, from what I understand, Valens will be their in-game leader who will call like initial setups and strats based on what they've practiced and prepped, or based on how rounds have been playing out, or, just kind of the general caller. But when he's lurking, or depending on how things go in the round, it will be Semphis who will be kind of the primary voice mid-round, kind of making adjustments and making reads based on information from the team and all that good stuff, while Valens is kind of lurking. If they are using a lurker, he will be kind of taking that lurking role. Whereas Semphis is more of just kind of in the middle of the map, just providing support in general to kind of both sides of the attack, or just whatever. Or when they're really, focused on an attack, Semphis may be one of the main entry fraggers alongside players like Sanctington and Automatic, traveling in kind of a pack or whatever. So that's kind of another pro that Semphis can bring to the team. We obviously know he's capable of being an in-game leader. He has been the in-game leader at times for Cloud9. Now, I will say, and I've said this several times, that in the Cloud9 situation, it caused the problem, I think, because you had two leaders. You had Sean and you had Semphis. Obviously, two very different styles of calling. But the problem is that even when Sean was like the in-game leader at most recent Cloud9 events, like ESEA, like their events overseas at the end of 2014, like Katowice here in 2015, these different events, while Sean was supposed to be the in-game leader, it seemed as though, at least when you look at the Katowice communications, it seemed as though like Semphis would call Sean off of things a lot. Like Sean would have a very strong read, and it was a good read, but then Semphis would say something else and would kind of overrule Sean. It caused this kind of leadership conflict. And so, while Semphis is a capable in-game leader, he has that more scrimmy style. Obviously, Sean Garris is a little bit more rigid and structured. It caused conflicts on that particular team with leadership as far as people overruling calls, whatever. On this particular team, I can see Semphis being the more dominant voice, especially in mid-rounds and throughout rounds. Yeah, Valence may put an input pre-round and kind of be like the guy that kind of grounds Semphis in some type of structure. So, saying, hey, this is what we practice, maybe we should do this, and basically providing some foundation, but allowing Semphis to kind of flourish as this guy that developed things, mid-game and mid-round as information's coming in and out. And he is a very smart player, and he's very capable of doing that type of thing. So basically adding to the positive side of Semphis, like his experience that I was talking about earlier, being able to teach this team, he'll really be able to help lead this team as well. And he has experience doing so at a high level, so that's obviously a big bonus to the team as well. When it comes to fragging, obviously Semphis can be a very capable fragger. You could argue whether or not Flowsick was a better fragger for this team or not. Honestly, the people who are putting the most work for this team are players like Sanks and Automatic, and then Chaos at times as well. So it's not even as if Semphis needs to be a huge fragger for this team. You can just help with leading, help with support, and help teach the team. Maybe even like kind of like in the team coach, but like in the game with them, so to speak. I don't know if that really came off right when I said it that way, but you get my point. He can really help, teach and support this team from an experience perspective. So basically what this all boils down to is this. I think overall this is a great move for Nilem. They were already a team that was kind of up and coming, that were, making a bit of a splash. They were, upsetting teams like Cloud9 on LAN at ESCA. They were also, establishing themselves above some of the other NA teams that were kind of fighting for a top 5 spot like Luminosity and such. They're challenging even when they're losing for the most part. So when they were losing to CLG at CEVO, at least they took them to overtime. They were challenging. They showed some promise. Maybe someone like Semphis can be that extra edge to help push them over, basically. Even at ESCA when they were losing to like elite teams like Virtus Pro and Fnatic, at least they were doing so in a way that they weren't getting embarrassed. They were actually challenging, like got quite close to maybe upsetting Virtus Pro and Inferno actually in the upper bracket in that particular map. So maybe Semphis, like I said, is this guy that pushes him just slightly over the edge. I don't know. We'll have to see. But I think that this is a good move for Nam, for a team that's trying to, be an up-and-coming team. This is a great addition that'll give them some experience and some added leadership, and can maybe, like I said, help coach Automatic and Sanctington along, make them develop even further into good players. They've already played quite well at the last 2 lanes they were at. Maybe he can further develop these players into being, more consistent and even helping them, develop into even better players just in general. So we'll just have to see. So overall, I think it's a good move. It's a good move for Nilem. Whether this is a good move for Semphis or not, is he going to be able to attain the same world status with this team as he was able to do with Cloud9 and Complexity? Will he ever, with this team, be able to get to a similar position that he had in his glory days with Complexity and in the early days of even C9 when they were placing top 8 and things like that? Will he attain that status with this particular roster? I don't know. What other options did he really have though when he got cut from C9? You have to kind of ask that. Could he maybe have joined up with Hiko and made some kind of super team there, and then maybe had a better chance that route than with this particular young team that may be more of a gamble? It's hard to say what options were available to him. I don't have that insider information, so this may have been what he thought was his best bet to succeed. And like I said, there's some young talent on this team that apparently isn't getting poached. So like I said, maybe they can be developed into something quite good. Now, what does this mean for the rest of the NA roster shuffle, just really quick? What could this mean? Well, I think this now means that Nilem probably won't lose any players. I thought maybe a team like Cloud9, CLG, or even Hiko building his team might try to poach a player. It seems like they're pretty stable now that they made this change. I think the team's probably happy with their recent results, and they're probably happy picking up an experienced and talented guy like Semphis. So there's that. So I think they're off limits. So obviously we already know Freakazoid's going to Cloud9 based on that email leak. So who could their fifth be? There's been rumors of Peter, maybe trying to poach him from CLG, but there's also been rumors of going a different route. Mo is a free agent right now. He could get thrown into this mix somehow, maybe, between either CLG or C9 as an opper. Who really knows, though, is my point. But at least you know that the Nilem players are probably off limits at this point for any team that Hiko's making or any moves that CLG or Cloud9 makes. Now, as far as what Hiko does, I thought Semphis might be a player that he would pick up, but it looks like not. And like I said, it seems like Nilem players are off limits. So he's either poaching players from CLG, or he's poaching players from Liquid, or he's poaching players from Elevate. It's got to be one of those three teams. Kind of curious to see which. If it's him and Skadoodle, you could see him pick up players like Desi and Roka from Elevate. Maybe not both, but maybe one of the two at least. I think if you look at Liquid, you could very possibly see a situation where, like if things don't go well at Faceit and Gfinity for Liquid, you could possibly see a couple of guys get booted from that team and Skadoodle and Hiko come in and play alongside players like Nitro, and maybe you could see like Hiko, Skadoodle, Nitro, Elige, and Adren, or Fugly in that mix, and maybe like Daps gets the boot or something. I don't know. I'm just saying that like that's kind of a possibility, or they could pick off players from Elevate and do something like that, or who knows? Like I've heard rumors about CLG, but I mean they're playing tonight with their normal five. I think this being April 27th, the first matches of Season 7 Pro League for MLG CEVO. So yeah, we'll see. But that's pretty much all I got. Just want to give you my initial reactions on what I think, the pros and cons are to Semphis joining Nilem. There aren't many cons in my opinion, other than maybe for him personally, but for the team, there's no real cons in picking him up. I thought the con might be issues with roles, but it seems like they're working around that pretty comfortably, and they're keeping their big players like Automatic and Sixthing in comfortable positions. Same with Professor Chaos, and it's really Valens who may shift role a little bit from like a support to a lurker to kind of let Semphis do some more support, or Semphis may jump into some entry fragging as well. So it seems like roles won't be a problem. Will Valens and Semphis conflict in leadership like Semphis and Sean did? I don't know. That could be maybe a con there. Some issues with leadership conflicting, kind of like what happened with C9 at the end. I don't know. I don't think so. But we'll see. I think this is a cool move for Nilem for sure. As far as for Semphis' personal future, it's a little bit of a gamble because it's such a young team, but we'll just have to see what happens. So I'll just leave it at that. Thanks a lot.